Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Big stuff happening in Ukraine. Somebody suddenly put out a news that the American CIA and the Russian spy agency have actually sat down, are having conversations in Turkey's Ankara. What has suddenly happened that both these guys had to sit down and actually have conversations? It's quite interesting to find out what's happening behind the scenes because there's suddenly a lot of diplomatic effort which is taking place between Russia and the US to figure out probably a end game to this war or probably to mitigate certain pressures that both of the countries are going through. It's interesting to find out what's happening. Why are these two meeting in the middle of the time when President Xi and President Biden are also meeting in Bali? So there's a story to be told, and I'm going to be here to tell you that story. I've got some analysis together, initial reactions. We'll obviously get more and more as we go on. But before I get into the game, let's please first like this video, subscribe, check your subscriptions. If you've not subscribed to the channel, please do hit the bell icons. And of course, yes, if you can, do help out the Dev Talks efforts with by becoming a member, sending just clicking on thanks or directly contributing towards the UPI number mentioned below. You can also visit my website, thedevtalks.com. Some new writing has been put up there. Let's get into the game. What's happening with these two countries? Why is there suddenly a spurt of negotiations or spurt of diplomacy taking place between the Russians and the US? We need to find out. Right. So, what's the news today? Let's just try and see that first. The news is that the spy chief of the CIA, the US and the Russians both, as the G20 meeting is just about to start, have met together in Ankara. This was reported by Turkey's state-run Anadolu news agency, who said that this meeting was being hosted by Turkish intelligence. The head of the Russian SVR, which is the spy agency, is Sergei Narishkin, if I'm not mistaken, and the US CIA chief is Bill Burns. Now, I'm not very too much aware of Sergei Narishkin's reputation, but Bill Burns is supposed to be quite a sorted, balanced guy. A lot of people say, and a lot of US analysts say, that if President Biden actually wants to listen to what is exactly happening on the ground in Ukraine, he should call Bill Burns, and he would be able to give him a good picture as to what's taking place. Supposed to be quite a sorted guy as per his reputation. Now, this particular meeting is supposed to have now the Peskov, who's the Kremlin spokesperson, who came out and said that this meeting was requested by the Americans themselves. The Americans have put out a statement coming from the National Security Council spokesperson, who says that we've been very open, right, about the fact that we have channels of communications with Russia, something that they were not ready to admit some time ago, on managing risk, especially nuclear risk and risk to strategic stability. The first time any conversation happened was when Sergei Shoigu picked up the phone and called up the defense secretary of the US, Lloyd Austin, and warned him about these dirty bomb threats that was actually taking place. So that was probably the first conversation that actually took place after Tony Blinken actually met with Sergei Lavrov in sometime in January. Right. So why Turkey right now? Turkey is very interesting. There's a lot of things which are happening in Turkey. Turkey has been trying to get in the middle of this, probably get a buck for itself or what. I'm not very sure. But Turkish diplomatic efforts have been pretty high in this entire thing. Turkey had stepped forward and said that, I will try and do some negotiations between these two countries. I will try and make them sit down between and do this. Incidentally, a sad terrorist attack took place in Turkey, which also kind of connects into this, and I'll get into that as we move forward. But an interesting comment came out of an ex-CIA chap whose name is Paul Kolbe, who's the director of the intelligence project at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center, right, which studies international affairs and stuff like that. He said that there should be something called the triple play, right? Triple play is that the Turkish should provide Ukraine with the S-400s. They should receive F-35 fighters from the United States in return and repair certain relationships between Turkey and the US, which have gone spoiled. This is very interesting because please understand, Turkey seems to be finding itself in the middle of a little bit of a tug of war. or a tug of war battle between Russia and the West, because if you know, Russia is also putting a lot of focus towards Turkey and banking on Turkey with regards to the grain deal within Ukraine. It is also banking on Turkey to become a gas hub for the entire EU. Uh, so, for all the EU guys who today say that we will stop Russian gas, they are accepting Turkey becoming a gas hub, which will supply through pipelines and others, other means, gas into Europe. Anyways, coming back to the topic, so Turkish presence in the middle is something that one would expect as a central player in the entire thing. The previous, all the agreements happened in Minsk, which is in Belarus. I think nobody would want to go to Belarus. Turkey today is coming out to be a game where a place where the game is being played. Of course, the Saudis tried doing some stuff and they took out a lot of these Azov fighters out of Russian captivity, but I am not sure whether the Saudis have been continuing with their negotiation efforts. There have been news, and I'd like to add this before I move forward. Minister Jaishankar met with Sergei Lavrov and many other Russian officials during his visit to Moscow. And 2 days ago, he also met the foreign minister of Ukraine, uh, talking about how to resolve this dispute and so on and so forth. Now, all this is happening at the background of the meeting between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, which is happening in Bali. I think it's been perfectly timed to kind of keep the media glare away from this negotiations, which would have made big news otherwise. Because of these two guys meeting in Bali, the media glare has been on the other side. We know last week Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor of the US, had telephone conversations with his Russian counterparts just before he visited Kiev. And of course, there is a statement which has come out from Mark Milley, who's the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said that winter is supposed to, in his opinion, would be a lull, and it's time to kind of explore diplomatic solutions to the end of this war. One of the things that we are realizing, that there is a lot of fervor which is coming in from the U.S. recently about diplomatic solutions, negotiations. You know, Jake Sullivan had gone to speak to Zelensky and said, you must try and don't negotiate right now, but don't say that you won't negotiate. You've put out a decree saying that I will not negotiate with Putin. Don't do that. It makes you look bad and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a push to get the Ukrainians to agree to negotiations, may not go and sit down to negotiations. Um, you know, uh, One of the things that Zelensky had put out some time back, he had said that the only way this war will end and we will sit down for negotiations is when the Russians completely remove themselves from all occupied territories, including Crimea. Uh, Anyways, and they would pay them reparations for all the damages that have happened, and including the military as well as the leadership of Russia should submit to the war crimes trial with the United Nations. So that was a statement that was given by President Zelensky. So you can figure this out. Of course, Jake Sullivan came out and said, we're not pressuring Ukraine, and we will not discuss anything about Ukraine without Ukraine. And we see both the CIA and the SVR chiefs meeting today in Ankara. Now, if somebody will turn around and tell me, no, 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 they are meeting for some other reasons, yeah, there are other reasons, but are you trying to tell me they will meet and not talk about Ukraine? It's something, this thing. I was checking out, the reactions for Ukrainians in the Telegram channel, and they are pissed off because they're saying we don't know what's being spoken. We don't know what's being done behind our backs. Is the US going to sell us out? And this is something that the Ukrainians are asking. So, the best of friends have a certain crack coming in the middle. Of course, the funny thing about this entire war has been that the Western media has been putting people sick. Now, and this is just as a joke I'm mentioning, of course, it doesn't connect with this entire talk. But today evening, a funny story came out that Sergei Lavrov was sick and he had heart trouble and he's been taken to the hospital. 10 minutes later, we got a video of Sergei Lavrov sitting in his shorts and t-shirts, reading some paper and laughing and putting a selfie after that. So it's the reason I've brought this up is that we need to cut through the clutter and try and connect the dots of various different news items which are coming across. We need to kind of figure out what exactly is happening by trying to connect the dots around the place, because there's so much that is happening. So I'm just in the beginning, I told you till now what is the kind of statements that are coming out of, especially from the US, who's basically controlling this war from the Ukrainian side. It is also interesting to see the kind of statements that are coming out of Russia, who's always been saying that, let's sit down and talk about it. And it is also interesting to see the statements that are coming out of Ukraine, where the leadership says, yeah, we're looking for peace and this and that, but we want Russians to be thrown out, and all that stuff. There is also the opposition or the hardliners within Ukraine that are saying that we will not negotiate with Russia. Any negotiation that will be done by Russia would be done by cowards and traitors and this and that. So that's the kind of language rhetoric that is coming out. Why is the US kind of wanting to get into this? I'm not saying by any chance that the US is feeling a bit little weak as far as their diplomacy is concerned, but there are certain issues which are coming out. Of course, they've got issues with China, which Joe Biden is trying to address uh, during this meeting with President Xi Jinping. There's also an incident that happened, as I told you, there was a terrorist attack that took place in Istanbul. This lady is supposed to be a Syrian lady who's associated with the PKK. PKK is a Kurdish organization which the Turks call as a terrorist organization. As a matter of fact, a lot of its funding and support comes from Sweden. So that ties into everything in terms of NATO. And as a matter of fact, very interestingly, the interior minister of Turkey said that the Turkey does not accept US condolences over the Istanbul terrorist attack. He said, and I'm going to right now quote him, and he said, I emphasize once again that we do not accept the condolences of the US embassy. This basically he's saying is because, he's saying that you guys, your Western powers, your Western friend, Sweden, he supports the PKK, and these guys are conducting terrorist attacks in here. This whole thing is problematic and this and that. Now you can imagine the NATO sign up is supposed to happen where Finland and Sweden are supposed to come uh, 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 into NATO with the approval, of course, of Turkey, who's been putting a stumbling block in this entire thing. So there are issues. NATO is not kind of united. I also spoke to you last week about the coalition of the willing, where certain countries who are willing to take part would have collected certain forces on the borders of Ukraine. Hungary, of course, isn't one of them, who's also refused to take part in the EU mission or the NATO mission to train Ukrainian soldiers. They said, sorry, we're not doing this. This is not something which is, that we want to do. And as a matter of fact, interestingly, they've also kept their relations up with the Russians. And of course, Viktor Orban actually went to Russia to meet Vladimir Putin and said very clearly, we need gas, we need our energy, so please don't cut us off. So I'm gonna just go back and remind all of you. Jake Sullivan has had some interactions. Sergei Shoigu and Lloyd Austin had some interactions, and now the CIA. So these are three big interactions that have taken place. What are the other issues between the US and the Russia? Is a couple of prisoner exchanges that needs to be done. There's this American NBA basketball star. The girl's name is uh, Brittany Grinner or something like that. If I'm sorry. And there's another chap who's supposed to be a spy as for the Russians, or a corporate security guy as per the Americans. Grinner was caught because of some marijuana presence with her and stuff like that. So that is also one thing that both these guys have been sparring about for a little bit. Uh, could be part of the conversation. I'm not privy to the details. And interestingly, which is what I want to bring out, is that every time a civilian has spoken to his counterpart in Russia, for example, Lloyd Austin or Jake Sullivan, they've had to come out and give press conferences. When you make a CIA guy go and meet, there aren't any press conferences. So you don't really know what exactly happened. It's kept quiet. And probably that's the game. They wanted to put it out because somebody or the other would have leaked it otherwise. They wanted to put it out that this is what is happening. What exactly has been spoken? Quiet. And that, I think, is the reason why the CIA went in. And Bill Burns, I think, is a very, very wise choice if he's actually been given the responsibility of negotiations. I don't think that's happening, but anyways, let's kind of see forward. Of course, as far as the West is concerned, they are facing a lot of challenge. There is a news as far as the economy is concerned that Britain and the Eurozone economies are likely to tip into recession this year. US, some people are saying it will, some people are saying narrow escape. It will kind of go through. Janet Yellen, who's their Treasury Secretary, said that ending the Ukraine war is going to be the best thing to mend the world economy. So, and Yellen is supposed to be one of those globalist, the what do you call World Economic Forum types and everything like that. I think the US is worried about economic cohesion between the EU. We can see that. I've told you about Hungary, I've told you about Turkey, who's kind of not in EU but in NATO, who's coming out and saying stuff. Hungary, of course, has said, I'm sorry, all of you guys, my network just suddenly crashed. I'm back. I've put it on a backup. There seems to be something wrong, which doesn't normally happen. Sorry, let's continue. So, there have been negotiations, as I was saying. Let me come back. The US seems to be a bit worried about certain things which are happening in Ukraine and the after effects of it. We can see the governments kind of falling down. We can see a whole lot of other things happening. Sweden has changed its government. Italy, the government has changed. Of course, you've also had issues with regards to the UK. UK is, Sunak may be there, but how long will he last out and how long will he be able to actually take this forward? It's a big problem, right? As I said, the Eurozone seems to be slipping into a recession, and that's pretty bad. There are questions being asked, right, about the amount of money that is being poured into Ukraine within the US. I'm going to talk to you about the election which is taking place in a minute. But there are certain other factors that we need to bring about. There are some very respected and renowned experts that I follow, guys like Ray McGovern, who are ex CIA, and of course Douglas McGregor and many other guys who are very, very convinced that there is a big, huge offensive from the Russians which are coming in. And if that does happen, the Ukrainians don't have the capacity to kind of fight. And that's something that is being spoken about pretty clearly. And even a lot of, Western experts are now saying that, listen, if this offensive actually comes to play, it is going to change. It's going to be a game changer. Of course, Mike Milley also said, winter's the time we need to freeze and we need to find a way to kind of balance this out. There are other issues which are actually being asked, and a lot of European countries are growing heavily concerned about it. Germany, for example, has reported missing weapons from Ukraine. They've reported certain weapons which have been found with some terrorist groups. Sweden has reported this. Poland has reported this. So there are certain weapons that are, of course, going gaib from there. There are a couple of YouTube channels that you can watch where ex foreign fighters, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them, who were on the ground and helping out Ukraine, who've actually given examples of the kind of corruption which is prevalent in Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine was it is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. There are known examples of them selling whole and whole consignments of weapons to the opposition itself. The Russians claim to have acquired, and I can't confirm it, claim to have acquired a HIMARS missile as well, and claim to have acquired some other Western weapons like the NLAWs and stuff like that. Now, on one hand, the Western powers want to support. On the other hand, they also know that all this nonsense which is taking place, and of course, because of all this stuff, certain countries are feeling a little scared to put in their weapons. Germany, of course, has been very reluctant to give a lot of very heavy artillery and heavy equipment. The Italians today have said, yeah, listen, we can't do this anymore. We cannot be giving any weapons to Ukraine, which was promised by the previous government or whatever it is. Ukraine crisis needs to be sorted out with negotiations. We cannot be doing this anymore. So Italians have backed down. As I said, quite a lot of people have started talking about it. The globalist agenda is being called out right in front of the world. People are talking about George Soros. People are talking about this and that and the other. So all that stuff is happening, which brings me to the Democrats' elections. Now, the internal, and I've written an article about this. It's to the tune of the fact that the internal politics of America is now affecting the rest of the world. So the elections is a big thing in the US, where the Democrats have kind of been able to hold the Senate, and the House seems to be with the Republicans. So there's obviously going to be some questions which are some not very comfortable questions that might be. And let me tell you this, I'm saying this with very big clarity, because as far as these things are concerned, I find both the Republicans and Democrats are one side of two sides of the same coin. But anyway, some questions might be asked to them, so they are kind of feeling a little jittery. uh, Another interesting thing happened today that was not really put out that much into the news media. Of course, there's a lot of push down on this kind of news, is that there's a list that I kind of found last night, and which talks about who are the largest donors to Joe Biden's election, midterm election efforts. Uh, the first one on the list is, of course, none other than George Soros, with some about 120 and $30 million, if I'm not mistaken. The second highest donor is very interesting. His name is Sam Bankman Friedman. He's supposed to be the king of the crypto. He had this company, or this basically crypto exchange called the FTX. Interestingly, he had given the Biden campaign about 40 million dollars, 39.6 odd $million for the campaign for this to be run. And this list is, by the way, there in the public domain. Those of you who are there on the WhatsApp group, you should be able to. I've shared this last night, so you can check it out. Now, this Bankman guy today basically filed for bankruptcy, right? After spending $40 million for the Biden campaign, today he's filed for bankruptcy. Now, I'll give you a little background. US, Ukraine, and UK are the three largest users of cryptocurrency in the world. A country that is at war, huh? Ukraine is one of the largest users of cryptocurrency in the world. It's the second largest, as a matter of fact. Now, this FTX company, which was owned by Sam Bankman, basically started a campaign called Aid to Ukraine, right? A lot of these damn things were done. Aid to Ukraine, they started a campaign where they were basically collecting money. They collected about 48, 50, or $60 million, which was routed in this way or that way into the National Bank of Ukraine, right? Pretty simple. Aid to Ukraine, they collected money, gave it to the National Bank of Ukraine. Now, all this has happened in the past 8-9 months. Today, the bankruptcy of FTX was brought out, and today, Ukraine also reported a news that Ukraine's cyber police exposed members of a crypto fraud scheme making over $200 million a year. And that is what is currently happening, right? So they say that we had detected some unauthorized access, and hundreds of millions of dollars have moved around, and there is something of this sort which has been reported. Now, the allegation against this Sam Bankman is very, very simple. It seems, and this is basically allegedly, no, I can't confirm this, there are a couple of news items that have come out on this. So if you want, you can get in touch with me and I'll share them with you. Allegedly, now, there was a lot of aid that was collected in the US pointed towards Ukraine by the party in power. Now, this aid was invested in this crypto and put across to the National Bank of Ukraine. A lot of the cash that went across. Right. So, as I was telling you, the game was they would collect the aid under this game of aid to Ukraine. Right. There was a sort of a setup that was done. They were collecting money from that, and it was supposed to go to Ukraine. Today, it was realized that up to about $10 billion have gone. 10 billion, okay, with a B. Where did this money go? No one knows. This guy files for bankruptcy and the show is over. Now, a lot of people are actually alleging that in terms of aid, a lot of money was laundered through Ukraine and brought back into the Americas into a lot of people's pockets. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens when you get associated with one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Excuse me. So this is a very interesting development, right? Cryptocurrency king, and he was in shows and this and that, files for bankruptcy. They open his books and realize $10 billion has been moved out of their accounts, turned around in Ukraine, and brought back into US. How far this will get reported in the mainstream media, how far will there be an investigation, God knows. But this is exactly what has been reported today. Right? This whole war, one thing that has been realized is that cryptocurrencies can be used, excuse me, as fundraising efforts. Right? They've been able to do this. They've been able to launder this money. I'm not saying 10 billion has actually been laundered. I can't prove that. But even if some amount of money has been laundered and turned around in Ukraine, it can be done. If that is the case, and if politics and a fear of investigation is driving the US to kind of put a crack into this, what we see is Ukraine will get dumped, right? It will get dumped like a hot cake. That's exactly what the US has done before, and that's exactly what will happen to them. We know for a fact since 1991, the Americans have intervened 100 times militarily around the world, right? So, this is one of them. What is exactly happening in this war is beyond the battlefield. There is a war of economic attrition, there is a war of politics which is taking place within the US, and of course, there is a war of who can make the most money. And that's something we can clearly see. If there is a system that has been set up to this extreme where money is actually being converted to crypto, sent across into Ukraine, laundered up, and brought out, making Ukraine one of the largest users of cryptocurrency. You can only imagine what's happening with these weapons, what's happening with all these little aid organizations which are taking place. Now, I'm not pro Russia or pro Ukraine. A lot of people have put called me names as to a Putin lover and this and that. I'm just here to analyze facts and tell you this is what I see happening in front of us. Now, as far as the war is concerned, I'm just going to take 3-4 minutes and then, guys, please shoot in your questions, shoot in your statements, your comments. There's kind of a whole lot of information that I've put across. All this can be found on Google, by the way. You can go through. There are new searches. If you don't find the Sam Bankman stuff, get in touch with me. I'll send it to you because this stuff will probably not be available. So, as I've told you till now, the war, Kherson retreat happened. Of course, it was a bad thing for the Russians. It was, as I said in my previous video, as far as the optics are concerned, it is a very, very bad thing. They've not been able to manage this optics well. If they needed to retreat, they could have done that before. Why wait for this long and then give us reason that we can't supply this place? That's why we're going back. I mean, you realize it now, of course. Anyways, the Ukrainian president, of course, went to Kherson and he, made his comments with regards to what is happening here, what is happening there, and the Russians are committed. Of course, the three major things that you hear all the time is the Russians have committed war crimes and this and that and the other. I guess it's all about taking the thing away from creating a different narrative, and I think this narrative has been heard and heard and heard. Of course, the recapture of Kherson was taken very, very scaredly. People are very scared about it. The Ukrainians didn't want to go inside and stuff like that, and it was a bit of a challenge. I'll just show you a small map, and just for a second, so that you guys understand what's exactly happening on the battlefield. And let me just share this map with you, so that let's try and see what's the game. And I won't get into details because there's just too much, but let's try and understand overall what's taking place. So this is what is happening in the war. This is the entire area where the Russians have occupied, which is basically the area in red. This area in blue is something till where the Russians, around here the Russians were there, and this is what they need to occupy. This is the area of Donetsk or Donbass, basically. Right, let's just go down south. This is the dreaded river, which is the Dnieper. This is the area of Zaporozhye. There's a nuclear power plant somewhere around here. Uh, this is the river that the Russians were kind of wanting to get back from. This is the blue area where the Russians had actually occupied and they were fighting in this entire region. The basic idea was to keep pressure on the city called Mykolaiv, and of course try and see if you could head into Odessa. Those plans seem to be on hold since they've kind of come back into behind the Dnieper River. Strategically, there are advantages for both the sides. One of the things that you can see and is that now Ukraine would be able to target Crimea through its artillery and medium range rocket fire. So that's going to be a disadvantage for the Russians. Of course, this area of the eastern bank is a bit higher than the rest of the area, so the Russians do have an advantage in terms of artillery and observation. What the Ukrainians are now talking about is an offensive which is going to come across from the eastern side of the Dnieper River towards the city of Melitopol, where they want to try and cut off the land bridge which the Russians have been able to secure to Crimea. Of course, there are not much battles that are taking place. The major battles are happening in this place called Bakhmut, and of course the outskirts of Donetsk city. These are the two places where heavy fighting is taking place. Bakhmut is a place where the of course the Wagner, which is a mercenary organization of the Russians, which is fighting there. There are so this is basically the line that this is the city of Bakhmut, and this is the region where the fighting is taking place. Now, there is a line, let me just zoom out of it so that I can show you, which is supposed to be a defensive line that the Ukrainians have got. Siversk, Ugledar, and Bakhmut, it comes down here. Uh, Post this entire thing, the next two objectives of the Russians would be these two cities, which is called Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These are traditionally Russian cities that have been, that is one of the biggest objectives that the Russians have been wanting to take. And because the rest of the stuff are satellite towns. So these are cities, like Bakhmut is a city. So that's something that they've been wanting to do. Right. So getting back to the game, that's what has been happening as far as uh, you know, that's what has been happening as far as the ground battle is concerned. Of course, very heavy fighting has been taking place in the Bakhmut city. The Ukrainians have themselves acknowledged losing about 3 to 500 men a day. Today, President Zelensky gave a comment saying that the we won Kherson, but Kherson has come at a very very high cost. So it's not something that, and this is by the way him speaking, is not somebody insinuating something and this and that and the other. It has come with a very very high cost, and the biggest news that actually came across a couple of days ago is that the city of Kiev have has asked its residents to evacuate for winter. So that means the capital city in Ukraine is not able to provide for heating, electricity, and basic supplies to its citizens. I personally presume if this big offensive, the big arrow offensive of the Russians actually come in, or if this whole missile attacks keep continuing, the position of the Ukrainians would be very, very precarious going forward. Not as far as the military battle is concerned, but as far as the civilian comforts and livelihood is concerned. Because you're going to hit out the electricity, how do you heat? And of course, as I said last week, snowfall has started in certain parts of Europe. So winter is going to play a game. Of course, the General Surovikin has said, the Russian general has said, we're going to be, strengthening our defenses. When you hear the Russians talking about strengthening their defenses, one of the things, please remember, is the Russians never go out and hit an offensive. If you look at their history, they create a defensive line. They kind of hold that defensive line. They try and entice the enemy to create an attack. They open up the defensive line, let them come inside, and grab them across and then move forward. So this is something that they do, and if you look at the entire Second World War, that's what they did with the Germans. They are known for their firepower tactics and stuff like that. We've seen a decent display of firepower during the Russia-Ukraine war. And as a matter of fact, as I've myself and General Shankar have promised to all of you, we will cover this as a subject. So that's all I had. There's a lot which is there around. One of the things is that you know cryptocurrencies are involved, back end transactions are involved, some money laundering is involved. Of course, George Soros is sitting in the middle of it. Putin is got his own agenda. Lavrov is in Bali. Xi Jinping and Biden are meeting. Indian Prime Minister is in Bali. Indian Foreign Minister met Russia and Ukraine. There are negotiations taking place in Ankara. There's just so much to cover, right? When you look at them individually. But when you put them across together, you kind of see a picture forming across, which tells you today that the US has started to lose patience with this war. There are clamors within the US to stop this nonsense and move forward. And of course, if the Treasury Secretary comes out and says there's a problem, we need to end this, there are problems that are being going to be seen. As I said, the loser in this entire game would not be Russia, would not be the West. The biggest loser would be Ukraine, and the second biggest loser would be the Europeans. There are pictures floating around of Europeans buying wood and oil to survive the winter. That's all I had. I'm going to take some comments and questions that you guys have put up. Guys, please like. That's critical. Please touch the like button. It's just a small touch. Helps me quite a bit. Yeah. Uh, Put your comments through. It's very, very critical that my videos reach a larger audience. Slow and steady, the audience is growing. I'm going to be crossing about 5,800 subscribers. It's been a great journey for me because I'm I've been able to do this not being known in this entire game. I've just started up and just did all this stuff. Great. Also, we've launched at Dev Talks, I've launched a series called The Soldier Speaks. The first episode came out today with Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, who told us his experience in the Operation Cactus in Maldives. Remember, each one of these people has 40 years of work experience. They've got so many stories to tell us. And my endeavor would be to try and drive these stories out of these, you know, retired stalwarts of ours. And there are him and lot many more that I'm going to bring out stories from. So let's wait for them as well. Right. Let's see what you guys have to say. Would taking Zelensky out stop or exaggerate the war? Well, that's that's a very interesting question. With the kind of precision ammunition the Russians have been displaying, I think taking out Zelensky would not be that difficult a challenge. Because I personally feel that the Russians have got somebody inside as far as intelligence is concerned. The kind of course, the Russians have not used the kind of force that one would have expected, but the kind of information that they've been able to pry out from especially when these sabotage attacks happened, one tended to believe that there is a big source that the Russians are kind of following inside Zelensky's top game somewhere. Taking him out, I don't think the Russians would have that in a plan as of now. And if you did take him out, I don't think the war will stop because he'll just become a martyr, which will rally all these guys around. And he's been the face of this Ukrainian campaign, the face of the guy who's been asking for money, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit odd, and trust you me, it's difficult to kind of gauge these kind of things because taking out the head, of course, during the Second World War, the Americans thought of taking out, the king of Japan and Hitler and all these guys. But it they always backed off from it because they realized it might just create a cult, which may be even more dangerous for the situation. I apologize, Mr. Verma, for the frozen screen, and to all of you guys. I will try and edit it out in the main videos. There was some issue that happened with the network. Never does before, and I don't think ever it should happen ever again. Created a bit of a challenge for me. Anyways, let's see. A crypto guy was highest donors of Democrat. If the Republicans get the House, they might start the investigations. Exactly, sir. That's what I was insinuating towards. The problem with the Democrats today seems to be that there are a lot of skeletons in their closet, more than I guess what Trump had. But again, I'm not a. Before people start calling me names as a Trump lover, I don't care. You can call me Putin lover or Trump lover, it doesn't matter. But anyways, let's get back to the game. The questions are already being asked. Like there's a governor governor candidate called Carrie Lake who's been asking very pointed questions. Tulsi Gabbard has been asking very pointed questions. So questions are being asked. The House Minority Chief, whose name is, I think, Kevin McCarthy, he has come out and said that, not a dime will go to Ukraine without proper verification and stuff like that. Of course, we know that the US has announced that there are inspectors on the ground in Ukraine, counting the weapons and doing an audit. How many of you believe that? I have a bridge to sell to you. But anyways, that's what it is. So yeah, questions are being asked and might land up into trouble. If except if someone calls me a Putin lover, okay. I thought that was a question. I just right. He is more sense making that fool situated. Oh, thank you, sir. That was a compliment. Thank you so much. See, the problem with these people is that when they want to derail you, they have nothing else. They'll call you names. I have so many guys, and again on the WhatsApp group, I keep sharing screenshots of these people. I laugh at them because at the end of it, here are people who don't want to read, who don't want to do research, who don't want to do anything. They will just switch on a TV channel and listen to whatever that anchor is telling them and believe it. Uh, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, but please corroborate information, read different sources, read both the sides of the story, so you will realize what's happening. Uh, it's not that this thing, and I'm not a Putin lover or anything. I am I am of the opinion today, uh, and let me put that out very clearly. These negotiations is something that people have been talking about. I personally feel these negotiations are not required at the moment. And I might sound like a ghoul who's looking at a war, but look at it from my perspective. And I'd request you to keep an open mind about this. Let's go back into history. The First World War, right? It ended. A lot of chaos happened, and this and that. A lot of people felt left out, and this and that. What happened after that? The Second World War happened. So the war did not come to an end. One of the biggest cries about the Germans was the Treaty of Versailles and what was done to them in that, right? So when a war is brought to a one-sided peace or pushed into a peace, there is always a certain regret that remains. Look at India Pakistan situation. We fought so many conflicts. We broke the country into half in 1971, and still we have a problem because there was not a comprehensive defeat. Look at the Americans and their various military campaigns which have gone through. Look at them getting routed out of Vietnam. Look at them getting routed out of Korea. They started in Korea, they started at the line that today is the border between both of them. They started the war there and ended the war there itself. So look at them, what has happened. Look at what has happened in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and in so many other places. Right? A conflict needs to be brought to a certain end. It needs to be brought to a certain cohesive understanding between both of them. It may be victor, loser, whoever it is. If you stop a conflict, if this conflict is stopped right now, they might just keep quiet for 6 months, 1 year, and then down the line start shooting at each other, which is, by the way, been happening for the past 8 years. So I don't personally think that talks and negotiations are the game right now. The West has made a big mistake in terms of supplying so much ammunition to the Ukrainians. The numbers, of course, 80, 90, $100 billion. Actually, what they've got is about 18, 20 billion. Now, India's defense budget for the year is 77 billion. They've got 20 billion in 9 months. That's a lot of weapons. That's a whole lot of weapons. They've got so many mercenaries going around, so much money, and as you can see, which is being turned around as well. So there's a whole lot more. The Ukrainians today think that they can actually win this. Where, as the chief of general staff of the Americans, General Milley, is saying, is not a chance today. This is Kherson, is it? They cannot go beyond this. They don't have the capability. This is what General Milley is saying. I'm not a military expert. I'm just trying to tell you what other people are talking about. As far as manpower is concerned, we know they've lost about 100,000 men dead. We also know they've lost about 3 or 400,000 men wounded and casualties. They don't have the money anymore. They don't have the trains. They don't have the electricity. They don't have supplies. The weapon supplies are dwindling down. Italy is saying no. Hungary is saying no. This is saying no. That is saying no. How are they going to sustain? So I'm not pro Russia or pro Ukraine. I'm not crazy. I'm trying to do an analysis of a situation which, by the way, is affecting all of us. Tell me in the comments if you guys go to the fuel station and fill up fuel and you don't realize that the fuel prices have gone up. Tell me if you don't realize the wheat prices have gone up, or the fruits and vegetables have gone up. Prices have gone up. India's before this war, India had $600 billion plus in our forex reserves. Today we have 536. Where did 70 billion go? It went because things have become expensive. We're not just buying oil from Russia, we're buying oil from various other places who is selling it to us at 110 or sometimes $100 a barrel, which is $30 beyond what we are paying to Russia. So expenses have gone up. It's affecting all of us. And that's one of the reasons I'm interested in this war. Right? So fair enough if somebody calls me a Putin lover, but I'm going to look at it from a pragmatic point of view to realize that Russia is a large superpower. Defeating that superpower is going to be very, very difficult. And the Americans have also realized it today when I've told you how. So let's see how things go forward. A lot of analysis, but that's how it is. Is Putin that weak? It seems mostly propaganda or reality. I feel there is something big in store for Putin, if you can clarify. I'm not sure what side of it that you mean, sir. Uh, Putin, see, I'll tell you, Putin is he's a lawyer by profession. Okay, one has to understand the leader. He's a lawyer by profession. If he says this is what it is, this is what it is in his country. He says this is what has been written. We will follow it. Remember, Putin just didn't attack this place. He first and foremost got the leadership of this country to declare independence on their own. Post that, they actually got together, created a security alliances between these two, Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Post which, as a security alliance, they signed a security alliance with Russia and requested Russia to intervene. Russia used the United Nations Article 51 of a preventive attack because they stated that the Ukrainians were planning to attack this area. So we are doing a preventive attack and going into this. So they went by the book. I've spoken to so many people who are basically army people who are disappointed in the way the Russians are fighting this war. They're saying, what's wrong with them? They're not listening. But if you listen to what the Russians are saying, is that we don't want to fight that way. We don't want to do the damage that we want to do. These are our people. And by the way, right now the fighting is happening in Donetsk, which is the place that they're trying to take over and bring it into Russia. Why would they want to destroy it? It will be crazy. As it is, it's gone to ruins because of the hardcore fighting which is taking place. But destroying it further will become a problem. We all saw those images of Mariupol. So I don't know what is something in big in store. Of course, a lot of people say Russia is authoritative and he doesn't have any opposition. Well, the Church of Moscow put out a statement that this guy is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. So there is a certain opposition, of course. A lot of people will call Viktor Navalny. I think I'll not say it, but please do some research into Viktor Navalny. And the way we hate Ford Foundation or one of these damn things putting money into our country or into certain individuals, that's exactly the same which is happening over there. Try and do some research. I'll just give you this hint. Figure it out for yourself and figure out if I'm saying something wrong. So the Russians aren't doodh ka dhula hua. They've got a lot of things bad with them. But what is happening on the other side is equally or even more terrible. So I'm not sure, sir, what you mean by with regards to the big part of it. He certainly isn't weak. The Russian people are behind him. At least 80% of them are behind him. They are pissed off with him. Okay. They are pissed off with him that he's not been able to give them a decisive victory in Russian lands. For them, it's Mother Russia. Please understand that. These are Russian brothers and sisters. So look at it from our perspective, a certain part of India, if something like that happens, how will you feel? They are pissed off with him. But that doesn't mean they don't support the war. No, they do. There is obviously a certain opposition that tried to run away. There is a certain opposition that you see in the mainstream media. giving out a statement, oh, I don't support Putin, he's this, he's that. There are people all around the world. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. That just tells you there are people who are opposing him. But it's not every Russian. No. So that's what it is. There's a lot of support for him. And if this offensive does come into place the way a lot of analysts are saying, it's going to be devastating. It's going to be absolutely devastating with regards to Ukraine and with regards to whatever infrastructure is left in that country. A lot of people are asking questions. There are bridges over this Dnieper River. Why hasn't the Russians blown it up? Because a lot of the other cities need to be supplied with goods and services. If they blow that up, these guys will starve. Civilians. It's how it is. They're probably fighting a little more humane war. I'll give you a small statistic. People talk about sorry, Sandeep, I'll come back to you for a second. Uh, I'll give you a small statistic. During the Normandy invasion, right, the Americans carried out a whole lot of bombing campaigns of the frontier in France. Do you know how many French were killed in that aerial bombing campaign? It was 60,000. 60,000 French civilians died just during the bombing campaign. So it's, I would say, a little more humane sort of an effort which is taking place. Of course, I'm not saying that civilians are not dying. They are, by the hundreds. But it could have been a lot more worse. बाइडेन और शी जिनपिंग के बीच क्या खिचड़ी पक रही है? क्या इन दोनों के दरमियान मुलाकात की है और दोनों ने, और जो बयान सामने आ रहे हैं वह हमारे लिए ठीक नहीं लगते? आपका मत? सर, हमारे लिए, देखिए सर, मैं ये चीज बहुत टाइम से बोल रहा हूँ, हमारे को किसी के ऊपर, हमारे को ये नहीं चाहिए कि भैया वो हमारे साथ रहे। चाइना के साथ जो हमारा झगड़ा है वो हमारा झगड़ा है, वो हम लड़ेंगे। हम किसी के लिए नहीं लड़ेंगे और हम किसी के साथ नहीं लड़ेंगे। वो हमारा है, अगर वो हमारे से पंगा करेगा तो हमारे से झगड़ा करेगा, 1-on-1। दैट इज एक बड़ी, ये क्लियरली चीज हमको बोलनी चाहिए, और हमारे सब लोगों ने ये बड़ी क्लियरली चीज बोली है कि साहब, ऐसा नहीं है कि हम यूएस के झोली में जाके बैठे हैं, भैया बचाओ चाइना से, ऐसा कुछ नहीं। आपको हमारे साथ खड़े रहना है, खड़े रहो, नहीं खड़े रहना, आप अपने रास्ते चलो, ठीक है? प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड, इनका भी काफी चक्कर है, ताइवान के ऊपर काफी इनकी टेंशन है। ऑफ कोर्स शी जिनपिंग साहब वापस आए हैं, तो थोड़ा बहुत गेम होगा, देयर इज नो क्वेश्चन। बट बाइडेन की तरफ से मेरे को ये भी लगता है कि शी जिनपिंग को प्रेशर जाएगा कि यार थोड़ा पुतिन से बात करो यार, इसको थोड़ा ठंडा करो। बिकॉज देखो, ऐसा है, अगर रशियंस वो ऑफेंसिव करते हैं और यूक्रेन कॉम्प्रिहेंसिवली डिफीट हो जाता है, वहां पर खत्म हो जाती है, अपना हाथ खड़े कर देते हैं, तो वेस्टर्न अलायंस के लिए बड़ी प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगी। तो करंटली ऐसा है, द अमेरिकन एंड ऑल दीज गाइस, ये कुछ भी करेंगे अपना चीजों को सीधा करने के लिए, दे विल फाइंड अ वे। अभी ये खेरसोन का जो रशियंस ने विड्रॉ करा है, वो बोल रहे हैं भाई हमारी तो विक्ट्री है, हम तो जीत गए। एक बार ही झगड़ा नहीं हुआ उस जगह में, ये रिट्रीट के टाइम पे वहां पर यूक्रेनियन जाने को तैयार नहीं थे, कि बोलते थे भैया वो तो छुप के बैठे होंगे, वो मारेंगे, और ये बोलते हैं हमारा विक्ट्री होगी। सो ये इट्स ऑल अ नैरेटिव। चाइनीज भी पागल नहीं है कि वो रशियंस को छोड़ के अभी अमेरिकन के साथ में बैठ जाएंगे, बिकॉज चाइनीज को पता है अभी आज तो अमेरिकन हमारे साथ हैं, कल कुछ और होगा, ये हमारे पीछे पड़ जाएंगे। तो काफी सारी चीजें हैं, बैलेंस करेंगे दोनों, देखते हैं आगे क्या होता है। ऑफ कोर्स इनके रीडआउट्स आएंगे, उसके बारे में बाद में बात करेंगे हम लोग। Adi sir, what do you think about ending the war on what terms and what it ends? Vijay sir, I think I spoke about this. It has to be a acceptable thing to both of them. It cannot be under any coercion, because otherwise you'll have these guerrilla attacks and this and all sorts of nonsense will take place. There'll be smuggling, and if there needs to be peace, look at Germany. They were dead against each other. Germany was destroyed. They start over. They said, "Boss, we are done." And today, look at it. It's one of the most prosperous countries in the world. Of course, going down the hill because of their own stupidity. But at the end of it, that's what it was. Terms would be decided by the victor. I think till now, what I see till now, I don't know what's going to happen. If Putin साहब कुछ बेवकूफी करेंगे तो फिर मैं कुछ उसका बोल नहीं सकता. But till now, what I feel is it's going to favor Russia. Ukraine manpower is it is going to be a problem. Your second question says, do you think Ukrainians are trust USA despite the lack of record, considering the war started after Ukraine pulled out of USA pulled out of Afghanistan? Sir, I don't think the Ukrainians even know what's happening with them. ठीक है, ये जो बोलते हैं ना, इतना झूठ, अगर एक झूठ को आप 100 बार ही बोल दो तो आपको भी लगेगा वो सच है, right? So they've repeated their propaganda so many times that I think they themselves have started to believe, yeah, this is what we are God's gift to mankind. And that's one of the drawbacks of narrative warfare, that the maker of the narrative at some time starts to believe what he's trying to say. He knows it's a lie, but it goes into his head that it's all truth. So Ukrainians, I think, are in, even if they win the war, remember one thing, even if they say, okay, abhi yahan par jahan par hain Russians ruk jate hain, and no further movement happens and no attacks happen. Let's look at the area that Russians have taken. They've taken the most industrialized area of Ukraine. 90% of Ukraine's industry are based in Donbass and southern Mariupol region. 90%, almost 80 to 90%. Their entire wheat field zone, where their wheat is produced, is in the southern region. The sunflower production happens in the southern region. As a matter of fact, the current regions which are there in Ukraine, which is under the control of the Ukrainians, right now, यार winter के बाद you have to put in wheat. अगर आप उसमें जमीन में कुछ डालोगे नहीं तो क्या उगेगा आपका? नेक्स्ट ईयर क्या खाओगे आप? आपकी इलेक्ट्रिसिटी है नहीं आपके पास. आपके मेल men have ran away or they are stuck in the army. What will be left of a society? बच्चों को स्कूल नहीं, कुछ नहीं. I mean, with of course इतना money laundering which is happening here, you think they're bothered क्या हो रहा है जमीन पे? बेचारे citizens को वो वहाँ झंडा पकड़ा के शुरू कर दिया है, but it's terrible, absolutely terrible. There's no other words putting it there. But I don't think Ukrainians have a choice. So उन बेचारों को, I don't think they even know what's happening. USA, in simple words put together, is just a big bully and warmongers. Sir, the Great Reset. Rohit Saab, please read about the Great Reset, where the US industry, the manufacturing industry base was lost to China. The only base that the Americans have today is tech and weapons. And they're not warmongers. This is called the Great Power Complex. There's a beautiful lecture which has been done by Professor Mershmeyer. Have a look at that. It talks about the Great Power Complex and the Great Power rivalry, how a great power will do anything to kind of keep its power intact. They want to remain the sole hegemon around the world, so they want to keep that power intact, and that's how it is. All right, guys, last question for the day. Who says many reports are suggesting that Joe Biden came to the conclusion that very soon Putin will make a strong comeback and give Zelensky nightmares, and Ukraine will be forced to come to the negotiating table. I think that's what's going to happen, but you don't know. I mean, if the Russians have been this stupid about certain things, I'm just being pessimistic, trying to shake off the Putin lover tag. Yeah, well, that's what you're saying, sir, is the most probable outcome of this war. It is the most probable outcome of this war. Yeah, you can. Again, I'm going to say this. I had a conversation with someone in Russia some time ago. I'm trying to get him online. He's a little reluctant with regards. They have some controls and stuff like that at the moment about the war, especially. He said one thing. He said that there is a very clear principle that has been set out for the armed forces by Putin, that you will not cross this line. There were certain generals that actually did, and they've not just been removed, they've been removed off the army. So the consequences for Russian, going against the directions are very, very high. But I think now the gloves are coming off. With the way that the attacks in terms of the electrical infrastructure is taking place, I think the gloves are coming off. There is the way that these attacks have happened. And if you see the way that the Russians have withdrawn from Kherson, they've broken up the bridges. They have broken up. There was a dam that the Ukrainians have been trying to blow up for the past since I think July. The Russians took out three sections of it in one go. Uh, they've blown up all connectivity in that particular region in terms of any bridge that covered between the west and the east. They blew up the TV tower, they blew up the water station, they blew up the electricity generation, they blew up all the pipeline system is being clogged. And this is not me saying, this is the Ukrainians themselves saying, and certain Russian bloggers that are talking about the subversion that was done. As a matter of fact, there are reports that the Russians had blown up tanks, those inflatable tanks and inflatable guns, and put them in certain strategic places where the Ukrainians would find it very difficult to. Oh, there's a tank in front, and they'll go slowly, slowly, slowly to only realize that it was a balloon. This happens in war. Deception is a part of it. Inflatable vehicles are used. So this is what was reported, and yeah, of course, it's a sad state of affairs. Let me say this: it's a bunch of lies that have been put across. We've not been told the real story. We've not been, and even in media, there's certain newspapers that I read is it's sad. I mean, it is lapped up in terms of this thing, right? I have a final comment. I don't know how this will end, but Ukraine is doing good. Biden can't be trusted to hang tough. The only way this can end is US and NATO gets involved on the ground. Well, sir, uh, you know, you're talking about a very dangerous scenario. Um, um, I can't remember one thing. Okay, let me break this down for you, and I'm going to take a minute to break this down for you. Um, Miss Lynn, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry. Um, you're talking about, Ukraine has been doing good, fair enough. They've had certain successes on the battlefield, there's no question. They've been able to win the narrative war to a large extent. It's only when you start looking for the Russian perspective do you find it. So that ways I agree with you, but you can also imagine the entire Western mechanism was behind the Ukrainians. Biden can't be trusted. Biden has a lot of personal kind of stuff hung up there. We know about his son's relations with the Ukrainians. We know a lot more which is happening, and now especially with this, Sam Bankman Friedman ZTX game which is coming out, and this George Soros connection and this and that, things seem to be a little more murkier than what you can see across. I'm not saying that they whitewashed about 10 billion, but even if 100 million is gone, that's a lot of money that was meant towards the Ukrainians. The biggest thing I talk about Ukraine today is, I was saying a while ago, is that they don't have electricity. They're not going to have food for the next year. They've not had children going to schools. I'm not sure about the health and care facilities. Money, we know that they're getting money from the EU and US. How far will these two will be able to cater on? Because the Ukrainians need about 30-35 billion a month to keep them sustained. A brain drain is a massive problem in Ukraine, because anybody who's well his worth is now going to be 9 months sitting in this damn war. He's going to just go off and go to another country and find something. Refugee crisis is going to be a big problem. Their entire infrastructure is getting blown apart bit by bit, which is going to be a big, huge problem for them. Country, remember these soldiers, Ukrainians. Of course, there is a certain force. They're all fighting for the land. They've not taken a break. They've been fighting for 9 months continuously. Some of them. What is the kind of toll that is taking mentally, being undertaken by these soldiers? What will happen? And of course, the final thing I want to talk about is corruption. The kind of arms that have been sold in Ukraine through this mess is going to create a very, very nasty society where, you know, and the worst part is they went into Kherson, and BBC has reported it, where they've tied up people to flagpoles with scotch tape and they're beating them for taking food from Russians. So I don't know. Your first point is US and NATO getting involved, ma'am. Or NATO does not have anything. NATO doesn't have any force as per se. It's the countries that contribute the force, right? US probably can contribute. They've got about 40 or 60,000 soldiers in Europe right now. What else is there in NATO? The Germans, the French have said we're not going in no matter what. The British Army, Air Force would not be able to fill up a soccer stadium, 72,000 in total. The Germans have very few forces, ground forces. The Polish have already been involved. They've got about 30,000 troops, as per certain reports, on the ground in Ukraine and have been fighting for 3, 4 months. Who else is there? The Hungarians have said no. Spaniards have said no. Portugals have said no. Swedish and Finland have barely have a ground army. What will they send? What are we talking about? NATO has to go in only with 100% agreement of all the members. Would Turkey agree? It's not possible. And secondly, if you actually enter Ukraine, what is the guarantee that US soldiers will not be shot? If I were Russia, and if you were entering as the US soldiers entering Ukraine, I would take out the US first. Why? Because they've got all the money, all the command, and this and that. Take them out. The entire force is finished. What if these people start getting shot? Would there be a war between US and Russia? What if one of the parties start losing? Would there be a nuclear exchange? No more dev talks after that. No more shows because we'll all be gone. So no, I don't think US or NATO would want to enter inside. And I'm talking about Joe Biden, who said there are going to be no boots on the ground in Ukraine fighting for this thing officially. Of course, we know there are other people on the ground, small numbers, but no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And there has to be an end to this, although this damn thing has been dragging on for too long. But this will, this has to come to a proper end. And I'll be a ghoul again by saying this, but no war should come to a premature peace. What happens with that is something that we've seen around the place, right? It's interesting. And you also say, I think Putin really wants a war with NATO, but doesn't want to seem like he does. He's pure evil, like Adolf Hitler back in. Right? I respect your views. I'm sure that this is something that you would like to agree. I don't agree with this. Uh, this is a free and open forum. I'd really respect your views, and anytime you're back, I'll be putting it up there without any these things. I personally think that if Putin really, the funny part about the narrative of this thing, and you've just mentioned it. You've said the army is weak and is being proven. Uh, you know, let's read both of the things that you said, and this is the funny part about the Western narrative. I want to kind of put this across to you and give you something to think, and with all due respect. You saying that I really think Putin wants a war with NATO, but he just doesn't want to seem like he does, right? So that means he's strong enough, he's got the army, and he wants to take over Eastern, Western Europe and stuff like that. And then you turn around and says army is weak and it's been proven. These two things don't match. And that's the problem with the narrative. On one hand, you're saying his army is weak, it can't even win in Ukraine. On the second hand, you're saying that he wants a war with NATO and he wants to take over the entire Europe. It just doesn't make sense. One has to think of all this stuff objectively, and that's the whole thing. Vijay Saab, all right, as a request, what will USA get after all this apart from defense purchases and defense company? That's a lot, sir, a lot of money. And of course, remember, uh, any war with Russia right now, or what war is being fought, what war the Russians are fighting, is at the Russians' doorstep. So the Americans are, of course, yeah, economically affected, but they're far away from this conflict. So that's a big win. If China invades Taiwan, remember, China, Taiwan, Russia Ukraine doorstep. It's at their each other's doorstep. It's not at the doorstep. The war is not in Mexico. So the US does win. And it's not the US does win, it's the establishment of the US, the MIC, the globalists, the neocons. They win. There's no question about it. Right. Thanks so much, guys. I'm going to wrap it up. It's about 1 hour, 11 minutes, getting late. I got to sleep. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope I made some sense with regards to what, uh, uh, what you wanted to hear from me. I hope my logic was sound enough. Of course, everybody else can have different opinions. And Miss Lynn, I grateful for your opinion. I differ with you, but it's a free world. This is where conversations must happen. You must put in your opinion, and I must put in mine. So that's what it is, and let the viewers decide whatever they like to hear. Right, I'm going to sign off now. Please do hit the like button, check your subscriptions, hit the bell icon so that you make sure. Miss Lynn, please do subscribe. Just because we have opposite views does not mean that we need to be on opposite ground. Subscribe to the channel. Please watch some videos. If it does make some sense to you, fair enough. Get in touch with me. My email address is right there. If not, that's all right. That's fine too. Thank you so much, guys. As I said, and I keep saying, if you can, do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts by becoming a member, clicking thanks for a super chat or a super sticker or a direct contribution on the UPI number mentioned right there. Visit the website, thedevtalks.com, and of course, stay tuned. If you want to join the WhatsApp group, please send me an email with some way for me to verify who you are and your mobile number. Thank you so much. Till next time, Jai Hind.